We're so excited and honored to have everyone join us today for the last cafecito of this spring semester. We are so excited to hear and learn from Dr. Contreras, who is with us today. And we just want to say a special welcome to all of our students that are signing in from Education 510, 575, 576. We're just so honored that you're joining us today, and also to our broader community as well. Thank you for being here for this very important and special cafecito. Before we get started, I'll do a few housekeeping things for folks who are in the Zoom, and also introduce myself before I turn the mic over to Dr. Contreras. But first, like I said, we're excited you're here. We want to know what you're thinking. This is going to be an informal conversation between us today, and you're here eavesdropping in, but we also want to know how this is resonating with you. So if you have questions, please drop them. If you're on Facebook, please drop them, drop a little hello. We want to know how these experiences, the stories we're going to share, are impacting you and resonating with you. And at the end of the cafecito, for folks who are in Zoom, you'll have some time to actually be able to raise your hand and ask a question live. Your video won't be on, but your audio will be on. So we'd love to encourage you to be thinking about questions that you have so you can directly ask them to Dr. Contreras as well. So that's my housekeeping. Again, I'm so excited to see chats pop up with where people are coming from. And a little background for folks who are in Zoom, you'll have a little background on, sorry about that, a little background on LatinxEd too, as the organization, and to introduce myself. My name is Elaine Townsend Utin. I am the co-founder and executive director of LatinxEd. We're a nonprofit organization based here in North Carolina that's really investing in Latinx leadership and expanding educational equity and opportunity across North Carolina. So we do that through youth programs, also our community impact work. And so if you're interested, want to learn more, there's so many ways to get involved. But what's really exciting about these cafecitos is that it's an opportunity to really amplify the incredible Latinx leaders that we have here in our state that are really mobilizing and activating their community and really leading with their story and their experiences on full blast, and really thinking about ways to design inclusive spaces and environments for students. And Dr. Contreras, you are such an example of that. And so I'm about to turn the mic over to you, but I will just let people know too that we're kind of meeting each other for the first time. So we're learning about each other in our journey. And so I'm just honored, and I can't wait to get in to learning more about you. So just a little background for folks who are new. Dr. Sharon Contreras made history in August 2016 when she became the first woman, the first person of Latina heritage, and the second African-American superintendent of Guilford County Schools here in North Carolina. She is a lifelong warrior for equity and an educational leader for excellence. And we're just so curious to learn more about who you are and how you've reached the roles that you have right now, but also just peel back the layers of how your journey has really influenced who you are and what you do. And so I'll turn it over to you, if that's okay, to start us off with just introducing yourself, a little bit about your background, and maybe some of the people that have, or experiences that have really shaped you who you are.
Well, hello, everybody. I am so deeply honored to be here today and to meet everyone. Thank you for having me. This is a great sort of break in the middle of the day to come and just share the things I've learned over time as some of you are just embarking upon your career. And in my mind, I'm still that age, but I can't believe 30 years has gone by this quickly. You know, I remember being a first-year teacher and a principal and an assistant superintendent and a chief academic officer, and moving along. And here I am, before you know it, 30 years has gone by. And I'm coming to the end of my career as a superintendent. But I have learned some things, and I am hopeful that I can share some of my wisdom about things that I've done well, things I have not done so well, but also just share my journey. So I'll start off by saying I grew up in Long Island, New York, with my mother and father. And my mother is African American, and my father is from the Bronx, but his parents came from Venezuela, immigrated from Venezuela. And it's interesting because I feel like I'm the best at everything. I wouldn't change it for anything. I just love who I am, and my cultural background, and how my parents and grandparents have fought for generations, all trying to get to the same place, a better, just better outcomes for their posterity. So I feel like I'm my ancestors' wildest dreams. Like they just never thought. I think of my grandfather coming over after walking down from the Andes Mountains. It's true, walked down, and he borrowed $50 in the early 1910s to come over to the United States. And he worked for the rest of his life in the United States, his very short life, just trying to pay that debt off. And I want to begin by saying my grandmother, she came over and she couldn't get health care. And she died having triplets on an apartment floor in the Bronx. And she was only 27 years old. My grandfather was 29 when he passed away, also from just working and working and working himself to the bone. And he got sick. He also didn't have health care, and that sickness turned into pneumonia, and he died on what was called in Welfare Island in New York City. And so all of their children, and all of them are twins. They had 3 sets of twins. All of them were placed in foster care. At that time, there were very little safety nets to protect children. So my father and his brother were placed in a family that actually used them as servants and did not send them to school until he finally ran away at age 14, and he enlisted eventually at 18 in the Marines. But it's just a heartbreaking story that I'm sure is not unique to so many of us who have come to this country searching for something so much better. But our grandparents endured so much for us to sit where we are today. And I don't take that lightly. I also think of my mother and her mother and father, who were sharecroppers in South Carolina and just worked themselves to the bones so that my siblings and I could go to school. And as a child, I didn't really understand why they were so hard on us about getting to school, but now I do. Now, as I understand that rich history of my grandparents, I know that education was so elusive for so many of us. And so they pushed and pushed and pushed for us to get to where we are today. And I wouldn't be here today if, there wasn't something in me. Not only did my parents and grandparents push me, but there was something in me that knew I was supposed to have something better. So in New York, and this is a little known history, I was bused to school to desegregate a school, and we were treated very poorly. We all came from one neighborhood, and it was a very working class neighborhood. There was nothing that anyone could say to look down on us, except looking at our skin color and our country of origin and the language that was spoken in the languages spoken in the neighborhood. And for that, they would, we were on bus A. The bus letter was A. They used to park the bus around the corner to not offend the white parents when they would drop their kids off to school. And in 5th grade, I learned there was a gifted program in the school. And so I felt like I was tutoring students. I knew I had straight A's. I had high test scores. Even back then, they had standardized tests. I knew I was smart, and I didn't know what giftedness was, but I felt like I was just as smart as the people, my peers that I saw being called out of the class in the afternoons every day. And so I asked my teacher, could I go down to the gifted classroom and find out how they made this error? I thought it was an error, like, oh, somebody just forgot little Sharon. I didn't realize it was intentional to keep us out of the program. And so the teacher told me, no, you can't go down there. But little Sharon was pretty smart. And so I raised my hand and said, can I have a pass to the bathroom? And she gave me that pass to the bathroom. And it changed my life because I walked right down to that gifted classroom and I said, somebody's made a mistake. I'm supposed to be here too, because I tutor her and I pointed everybody out. Like, they all come to me for help. And so I'm supposed to be here too. And my parents came up that night. And, you know, my father could turn up pretty quickly. And he made sure that I was enrolled in that program. And it completely changed the trajectory of my life. And I was determined from that point on, because I learned not everybody is comfortable speaking up for themselves, will even know to speak up for themselves. Not everyone will have parents who will go to the school and demand more. And even when some of our parents went to the school to demand more, they were not listened to and are not listened to even today. And so I decided I was going to fight for children. And I had a great teacher. I've only had one teacher of color in my entire K-12 experience. And that teacher said, you know, you can go on to do great things, go into teaching. And one thing that's sad to me today is that students will ask educators, you know, should I teach? And we encourage them to do something else. I hear teachers all the time say, this is, you know, not a good field, don't go into teaching. But I don't know how we'll have any representation or exposure for students who are not of color if we don't go into the field and let them know that, you know, teachers are intellectual, administrators are intellectual, and we change lives, and every other field comes from what we do. Like, nobody else would be here if we didn't do what we do every single day. So all of these brilliant scholars and astronauts and surgeons and people who are creating through artificial intelligence and robotics, they're there because of what we do, because we chose education as our field. And so I went on to college, and I did well in college in New York State at what is the premier state school in New York State. It's called SUNY Binghamton. And it would be what you all consider here your UNC system. And so I went to that school, and, you know, we endured all the microaggressions that we've gotten used to enduring. I remember a professor saying to me in graduate school in front of the entire class, you know, Sharon, he went over the syllabus. If you need help, afterwards, Sharon, like looking at me, the only person sitting there, the only brown person sitting there, if you need help, you know, I'll be glad to assist you. And I really thought he felt he was being helpful by saying that in front of all of my white peers. But I went on to excel in English and got an undergraduate degree in English and got a graduate degree in teaching and in English, and went on to become an English teacher. And I realized, though, in teaching that there was so much I couldn't do, so many children I couldn't reach when I saw the systems. And this was before I really understood systemic racism and the structural racism that so many of us face, our children face, our communities face. But I knew something was wrong with the system. And so I said, I have to do something else. And so I said, I want to be a superintendent. So they said, well, there's a few steps in between there, between teacher and superintendent. And so I went from being a teacher to a principal. And then I became an assistant superintendent. I became a chief academic officer. And then I became a superintendent. And I tell you, it's just been a joy, an absolute joy, the joy of my life to be an educator and to impact so many students. And most will never know what we've done to, push back on the system, to fight the system, to work toward educational justice for them. But it doesn't matter to me. I'm not doing this to have a name. I'm doing this so children have a life. I could care less about the test scores. They're just an indicator. I mean, they're important with respect to understanding where students are. But in terms of what's important to me, it is transforming lives, transforming communities, and ensuring equity and justice, and a world that is more just for our children. And, they're not like so many of our parents or even some of us. And I don't mean us in this room, but I mean people in our age group where we're so frozen and almost paralyzed by all of the isms and, just pushing to maintain these systems of inequity. So many of them want something different, want a different world. And I think schools are the place that can push for that, even though we're in a period in our country when it has become unpopular to do so. I tell people to keep pushing anyway. And one of my favorite authors is Junot Diaz, and he wrote an article and that I read to myself all the time. And I can't even remember what the name is, but I read it at least once a week. But it was a letter to his niece that was published, I think, in the New Yorker or the Atlantic. But he talked about maintaining radical hope in difficult times. And he pointed out that those who came before us had much less than we have. Like, we're getting so discouraged by what we're seeing right now, the polarization in our country, the pushback on the civil rights that we've gained over time. But he pointed out there were those who came before us who had it much harder, who weren't even given the dignity of maintaining their own names. And so we have to keep pushing and survive in honor of those who came before us, who worked so hard so we can sit here. And in truth, part of why we are where we are today in terms of equity and the pushback on civil rights, the pushback on equity, is because we started resting on our own laurels, resting on the work that our ancestors and forebears did, those who worked so hard to get us here today. And now we have to, in their name, to honor them, to start all over again, to make sure that every child has a chance to really reach their own potential. And I was just saying yesterday at our Guilford Education Alliance annual meeting that we can never, ever stop pushing. Like, we just have to fight for equity. There is no child worth losing. And I know some people told me when I got started, well, you're not going to reach everyone and some you're going to lose. It's totally unacceptable to me to say that, to ever say that somebody's child is worth or not worth saving. And we have to fight for that every single day. We have to change the mentality, even of our own people. Sometimes it's really difficult for me to see some of our own people, Black and Brown people, who work against students staying in school, who push for suspensions, who don't want or don't push for students to have access to high-level courses, who don't push for students to have the very best teachers in their classrooms. We have to push back on them as well and remind them of our history and how we got here. And so I'm just so grateful today. Today my board facilities naming committee is moving forward with naming a school for the first Latina. There's the first school named for a Latina in the history of North Carolina. So the board will be voting in 30 days. I encourage you all to please submit emails to our public comments in support of this. So for 30 days, you can say, we support naming your school the Sylvia Mendez School. So I'm so proud of that I'm leaving in 2 months, but there will be a school name for a Latina in North Carolina. And I'm very proud that it's for Sylvia Mendez, because very few people even know the history of that case, and that is the precursor to Brown versus the Board of Education. But I encourage you all to keep fighting for justice. Remember what Brian Stevenson said: if you haven't read Just Mercy, please, it's a must read. I have bought at least 1,000 copies, and I'm not exaggerating. I teach it, I give it out. I believe we all have to really understand what he says about hopelessness is the enemy of justice, and to make sure that no matter what the state laws are, no matter how they underfund schools, no matter how few of us are in the field, we must protect our own hope, knowing that it's going to get better because of the work that we do, because we don't give up ever, that we just keep striving for a more just world. We keep striving to perfect this union, because we understand democracy. Now, some say we're not true patriots, but we are. We understand democracy, and we understand what perfecting the union really means. So I invite you to keep pushing. You have chosen the best field, and I hope that some of you will step into my shoes as a superintendent, because right now, about 40% of the nation's largest superintendencies, those superintendents are leaving like me, but 75% of them are being filled by white men. So they're not replacing the superintendents of color with superintendents of color. They're replacing them with white men. And so this is a problem for us, as I said, because representation matters. But as I looked at all of you that are on this call today, it makes my heart just happy and fills me with joy, because I know I'm in a good place.
Right.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Contreras. I have so many reflections to share back, and actually have a question that's going to lead to, but hearing your story and your family's journey as well, I am just seeing in the chat and within myself that it's striking such a chord. I think about my family, my ancestors, originally from Peru, that's where my family's from. And I think about, I'm part of the generation now that's breaking extreme cycles of poverty. And it's been such a journey. And I see this in a chat. Somebody said also just that the journey of children, of future generations of immigrants, and how we're also processing what they've been through in their journeys and how they've been trickled down. In some ways, real talk, the generational trauma of it all, but also the radical hope of it all. And I think that's what your quote here that someone quoted you to say, I knew I was supposed to do something more, and how deeply that hit home for even people who are just listening, because it hit home for me. And I think that is a quote that I've heard from my mother as well, when she tells her story of ways that she mobilized our family to even come to the US. Like, that's that inkling of like hope that really is radical in that space, to dream of something bigger and better for not just yourself, but your family, your community. And so a question I want to ask you and follow up with, also reflective of other conversations my class has been having, and one big conversation that I'm seeing like a theme come up is around self-doubt, and just that the natural human emotion of feeling like, am I meant to be here, or do I belong, when you don't see yourself represented, or you don't know anyone who's walked the path that you want to walk. And just wanted to ask you a personal question of how you've navigated any of those types of symptoms that come out of like imposter syndrome or imposter training in leadership, because that's real. It's all kinds of real. And I just think about ways that the systems that we've navigated as students, as learners, as leaders, have really cultivated that feeling. But especially when it comes to thinking about leading as well, of thinking about how to use our voice and how to lean into that radical hope. So anything that you'd like to share about your journey and overcoming that would be, I'm sure, I'm very curious, and I think other people would love to know your journey.
Yeah, I've never felt like an imposter. because I know I've been around so many people. I've worked, I think, in 6 states now, and
Wow.
I know a whole lot of mediocre people. And I know that generally for us to get here, we're always at the top of our game. I have 6 degrees. So let me tell you all a story. When I was appointed superintendent in Syracuse, the reporter, the educational reporter, legitimate reporter, came to me and said, "May I see your superintendent license? I was told that you are only the superintendent on paper, but the former superintendent has to continue to sign for you because you don't have credentials." It was like my birth certificate moment, produce your birth certificate. And on one hand, it was infuriating, but I said to her, I don't know you at all, but let's just go through this story. Does it even sound like it's possibly credible that the state of New York would allow me to be the face of the superintendency while someone else is signing for me, and would allow the first superintendent of color, female superintendent of color of the large districts in the history of New York State to not have credentials? That doesn't happen for us. I'm certified in 9 states. That's about 20% of the entire country. I'm certified to be a teacher, a principal, a superintendent, but we are always told that we are less. And as I said, I have 6 degrees. Most of you will always outshine your peers because we have to. We've always had to. My mother used to just beat that into us, like, you must be better, you must be better. So don't ever, ever let anyone make you feel like you're less than. Now, sometimes they have experiences that we don't have. So you have to stay in networks that will support you in gaining some of the skills and experiences that maybe they have, but it doesn't mean you're intellectually inferior. And I also see that when I ask particularly women of color to step into leadership roles, they are always hesitant, always. They always say, I really got to go home and think about it. I got to go pray. I got to ask this one and that one. I can ask a 23-year-old man to be the deputy superintendent, and he will say, yes, I deserve that position. Yes, I'm ready. I've taught for 2 years now. And so don't let people make you feel like you're less than you are. But at the same time, make sure you're in the sort of networks that will be supportive of you, that you have the right kind of mentorship, so that you can sit in that room and not feel uncomfortable about, just new practices, new evidence-based practices, but all of those things, school finances, all of these things can be learned. I didn't come out of the womb knowing it. I had people who were invested in developing me and making sure that I grow. But no matter what you know, people will always try to treat you like you're less than. And there are many people who have been so kind and generous to me and good to me, but there are others who always try to circumvent my leadership, will go around me, will post horrible things on Facebook and Twitter, and just, you would meet me and then say, who is this woman they're talking about? That's part of what they do to undermine leaders of color. And we just have to keep pushing anyway, because as I said, like Juno Diaz wrote, the people before us, our ancestors endured much more than even what I feel. Sometimes like I want to go put a blanket over my head. It's so bad. But I have to remember some endured worse. So I can keep pushing.
Amen to that. There's so many truths there, and we're grabbing each one. I think about, and there's a question in the chat that I'm going to lead up to, but you've been such a powerful figure, but in addition to the work that you've also been spearheading in Guilford County schools in particular. And so the question in the chat that I think ties into some of our questions around like key milestones that have led you to the role and the vision that you currently hold, and now are kind of in this season of accumulating too. But the question is, one of the biggest changes that you've made that you're proud of? And I thought that was a really powerful question. Thank you, Brianni.
So there's quite a few, and it's not just me. I set vision, and I have great teams. I mean, from, the custodial staff, the teachers, principals, my leadership team that have done so much to make sure that vision was implemented. But some of the main things that pertain to creating a more just school system was one, registering students to vote. 17 and 18-year-olds. It's in the state law. It's in the state law that we're supposed to have a registrar at every high school, and you can register them, I believe, at age 17. So we registered many students, thousands of them. And we had, I think, in one of the last elections, the highest percentage of 18-year-olds voting in the state. To end wealth inequality and the racial wealth gap, we need to vote. I mean, that's the number one barrier, our policies, and you change policies through voting. So voting has to become as natural as breathing to our students. In a democracy, they can't feel, well, that's not for me, it won't change anything. So we just got all of our local organizations to lean in, and we did it in a nonpartisan way. You would have thought, you wouldn't believe the pushback and just sort of the hatefulness I received after doing that. But I realized that's because people know the power of voting. And that's why they've tried so hard for centuries to keep people from voting and to keep us from having fair voting systems in this country. So that's one of the things I am so proud of. And right now, no matter what they say about me, I don't care. I'm going to make sure these students are voting and they're out, and we have organizations out and they're in our schools, even today in the high school social studies classes. And I have 28 high schools. They're making sure that students who are eligible, legally eligible, are voting. Another thing was to become the first, and we're still the only district in the state, and that really bothers me that no one else has the courage to push on this, to allow parent appeals for student suspensions, for short-term suspensions. I mean, in what world, in what organization is there no sort of process where you can say you got the information wrong and here are the facts? Where can one person make a decision about your destiny? Something that goes on your college application, stays in your record. And on the Common App, there's even a question that asks, have you ever been suspended? So if you have two equal candidates, but one says I've been suspended and one doesn't, we don't know what the impact of that question is. So we have to make sure that if someone is removed from the educational setting, that it is for an egregious act where we have to say, you did something that was so egregious, we have to remove you. But when you come back, we're going to welcome you back because schooling is what changes your life. But at the same time, parents should have a right to say, wait a minute, you're going to explain to me the evidence you use to remove my child from the educational setting. And I think those are two of the biggest wins that I've had in Guilford County, but we've expanded access to our advanced placement classes, our IB classes, our elite schools. When I got here, there was not one Latino principal in this entire district. We're up to 4%. And it's slow, but we're moving forward. I have more Latino teachers than I've ever had in the history of the district. So we just keep pushing on these small things that make a difference. And people won't like it. Change is uncomfortable. They'll make up stories about you. They'll lie. They'll, everything when you really work toward justice. But you have to remember, if no one's saying anything about you and everyone loves you, you probably are not doing anything on behalf of the most vulnerable kids. So never, ever feel badly that there will be people who are upset. We're meant to disrupt the systems because the systems were not designed to be fair.
Right. Say again, I just keep wanting to say amen. I feel like I'm in church right now and you're just preaching a lot of truth. I'm going to tie this into this next question that I'm also seeing in the chat, but what you just defined to a definition that I've been exploring with my class is the definition of leadership and really being able to walk people to and through change. And that role and the practice of leadership is also having to think critically how to stay alive in the process, because it's dangerous to be in that position and to be the messenger or the implementer of change. And so it's really powerful to see how your vision has really impacted these critical changes in your district and beyond. I'm sure impacting the ways that people think about how to do work across the state, across the country. And so this question is going to bring us to post-secondary attainment conversations, which a lot of what you've talked about is influencing post-secondary attainment in North Carolina, and especially Latinx student as well, student success. So what do you wish people knew about post-secondary attainment, maybe specifically thinking about the Latinx community, but maybe these are challenges or opportunities or things that you just feel like people need to pay attention to? And you've already shared some examples of maybe how you're doing it, but anything you'd like to lift up?
Yeah, I would say that Deming said, your system is perfectly aligned to get the results you're getting. So if most of your students of color are not going on to colleges and universities and not completing once they're there, or taking lots of, remedial courses, then your system is set up in that way. And so I think about this a lot. How do we make sure there's some equity of access? And I heard a stunning statistic yesterday that if you're not on grade level by 5th grade, you only have a 5% chance of catching up. Now, just think of how hard that is for the teachers and everybody in the system after 5th grade, 5% chance of catching up if you're not on grade level. So we have to set up structures from the time a child enters pre-K that ensures that students are on the pathway for good post-secondary outcomes, whether that's career or college. But certainly there are very few jobs of the future that don't require some kind of technical education, even if it's 2 years of education. But far too few of our students are taking advantage of that. And there's so many structural barriers that you have to constantly look at as educators, not just test scores, but who's in the class, who's teaching. I read some data I think yesterday, and I printed it out, but here it is. It says, in 8 states, more than 25% of Latino students attend schools with high percentages of novice teachers. Like in 8 states, 25%. That's amazing to me. We're more likely to attend schools that have high percentages of uncertified teachers. Some states, our students are 2 to 3 times more likely to have the high percentages of novice teachers. It's like, when you really drill down, and then you look at the school board policies around who attends what schools, or how you get into advanced placement classes, IB programs, like all these teacher references and things that are really subjective. It's a problem for us. Like, we have to think deeply about giftedness and how you enter gifted programs. How can it be more than a test, but it's not reduced to a teacher saying that student should be in the program or not? I can tell you, I was sitting in a research office 3 years ago, and I happened to look up at the screen of the research director, and I saw a student in the 99th percentile at my lowest performing school in the district. So I thought this was really interesting, and I went over to the school. I spoke to the teacher, and I said, this student is in the 99th percentile. She can be in our very, very gifted program, which is like the highest performing 1% of students in the state. She looked me in my face and said, I have no such student. How could you not know that kind of brilliance is sitting in your room? Like just not using data, but just such low expectations. And so there's so many structural pieces we have to get right, so much data we have to review. So we are making sure that our students are on the path to success. And I think that we'll always see the sort of violence and poverty and struggling in our communities when we are not making sure that individuals reach their full potential. But I don't put this all on schools at all. And as I've gotten older, one thing I've really pushed for is making sure that we use our voices to speak about how systems are related, and that, students don't just come to school behind because their parents didn't do what they're supposed to. And no, we shouldn't expect teachers to work miracles when there's systemic racism in housing, transportation, the criminal justice system, the healthcare system, and it all converges upon our communities. And then teachers are supposed to fix that. So I try to make sure educators understand how these systems are related and oppress generations of students, so that not only are we teaching and doing our best to lift one another up, but we're also fighting these systems as we do our work as educators.
That is so powerful, just thinking about, I think that's where there's so many opportunities to reimagine, redesign a system that truly meets and serves the diverse needs of our students, and then also be challenging the mindsets that we show up with, of like how we're operating and thinking about people from maybe even a deficit perspective, which we see happen so often, that might limit student success or even opportunity just because of certain mindsets that have been really embedded. And I think about the South and the unique context that a lot of us have experienced as that student or in that position. And it is really, I think it's powerful when people are able to reconcile with their mind and thinking about how they're showing up and becoming more conscious of either the behaviors that they have or the beliefs that they have, or the mindsets that are really driving their own decision making at a micro level, as well as seeing how that's displayed on the macro level too. So thank you for sharing that. I'm like looking at time, and I knew time was gonna fly because there's so many juicy things to talk about. But I do want to turn it over to our audience, because like I promised, you get to also ask questions directly to Dr. Contreras. And so I just want to encourage you, if you're thinking about a question, if you're a little nervous, hold back that nervousness, because this is your moment. And go ahead and raise your hand on the Zoom feature, and we'll bring you to the stage and you can ask your question. So be thinking about your question. I think we have a first volunteer, Elsa. So thank you so much, Elsa. And Jose, go for it. Thank you for bringing her to the stage. You are here, Elsa. Thank you.
Hi. First of all, I'd like to say thank you so much for your conversation. It's really inspiring, and all your wisdom. I'm taking it all in. But my question is, what is one thing that you wish you could tell your younger self?
What is something I could do myself?
That you could tell your younger self.
Oh, I think to go slow to go fast. So when I see some of the injustices and things, like I get so upset and I move so quickly, and I would have done some things differently in terms of trying to get more engagement. Now, that doesn't mean that people are going to do it. I'll never forget Thurgood Marshall saying that sometime when he spoke about Brown versus Board of Education, he said, sometimes you have to change the behaviors before you change the heart. but I do think I could have done more on the affective side. So it's okay to be passionate about justice, but I would tell my younger self to, there's so much, you're called to do so much. I personally am not going to change the educational ecosystem in the United States. I am contributing to that, but I can't hold myself responsible for all of it. And I think we're hard on ourselves, particularly women, and we want to fix every single problem. You can't. You take one at a time and you get people to come with you as you're moving to resolve these problems.
Thank you so much. And thank you, Elsa. Appreciate your question. And I think I see another question in the chat in case someone's ready to get your hand up. We'll wait for you for sure. But one question from Sam is, who are your role models in your leadership? Who do you look up to?
Yeah, so certainly there are lots of, social justice warriors and others that I look up to, but really I would say my mother more than anyone, because when I think about how I push on the system and how I have some of the knowledge and skills, it's because I am my mother's daughter. And she didn't go as far in school as I did. I think about her raising 10 kids, and then going back to school and pushing for us to go to school, and really always being so supportive of all of us and telling us we can become anything we want to be. And that's sort of why I don't have that syndrome, because she told us you're so smart, you're so gifted, you're so talented. And I look up to her because I think about how much she gave up in life so that we could have what we have today. So I know it's a popular thing to talk about all the famous people we look up to, but in truth, I look up to Mom.
Ditto. I also shared the experience. Well, I didn't have a teacher of color from between K to 12, but I always think of my mom as my teacher too, even though she wasn't formally in my classroom, but at home, her and my abuelita were working hard to teach me at home. So I always resonate with that so deeply, of like their example, and really being a part of their legacy just adds this whole other layer to that of how special that is. So thank you for sharing that. All right, well, we will hold space for, let's see, if you have a hand, don't hold back. Like I said, please raise your hand and we'll create space for this. But a question that is circulating, I'm trying to, I'll reword it in my question as I ask it, but in the chat, is just maybe something about yourself that others don't know about that maybe you wish they knew about you. I think that's a way to reframe that question.
Well, I think some people don't know this, but a lot of people will say, "Oh, she's really tough." Some people even think I'm mean, that I'm not one who is outgoing, but what they don't know is I'm functionally deaf. So sometimes people are talking and I haven't heard a word, or they're out in public and they've spoken to me and I didn't hear them. So if you literally don't touch me on the shoulder, I would not know that you said a word. And that's always heartbreaking to me, because I see myself as very warm and an around the way girl, approachable. But for some people who don't know that I'm living with this significant disability with profound hearing loss, they just think I'm ignoring them in a meeting, I'm not responding, I'm not speaking to them in public. And that's been hard sometimes. People have apologized to me 5 years later and said, "Oh my God, I didn't know. And I just, I was so angry at you for 5 years because you didn't speak to me at a function 5 years ago." And that happens to me all the time.
Wow, thank you so much for sharing that. That must be just this whole layer to this journey of navigating people and deafness, right? And trying to figure out how bring these worlds together, which is so just another area of equity it's just such a huge gap. So thank you for sharing that part of your journey. And we have another question from Facebook from Brian. Hi, Brian. And his question is, how do you make the elders, caregivers, and those not in school feel valued in the school community? What an interesting question. Thank you, Brian.
Yeah, so, I'm one of the longest sitting large district superintendents in the country that is a woman of color. And I believe that's because I understood when you go into a community, you have to be deeply engaged with the community so that they support you when there's, not just so they support you personally, but they support you, they support your initiatives on behalf of students, and they can go out and explain these things to others. So I actually spend a lot of time in the community, and I require that my senior level staff and principals spend time on boards, in community organizations, in civic groups, representing the district, so that they are always proximate to the community and proximate to the problem. And I think we often don't understand what the elders and caregivers are going through, or why they might not want to support a school bond, because we're not proximate enough to even know they're having difficulty paying for their medication, or they're trying to take care of grandchildren, or whatever it is. So my recommendation is, when you come in, I know lots of superintendents go right to the schools and the teachers and the principals, and I did all of that. But I realized that in Guilford County, 78% of the community does not have children in the school system, and most communities are very similar. You must spend time with them because they're not checking the website. The only news stories they get are what people write. So you have to constantly tell the story of the district.
That is so powerful. Thank you for that. And we have two more questions, and then I think we've hit our time, unfortunately. But one question is from Vicky in the chat, and she's asking just if you could direct us to find the link that you mentioned around submitting public comments for the naming of the school. And we'll make sure to share that with everyone. But if there's a place we should be looking for that.
Yeah, it's actually, if you go to our Board of Education site, if you go to the GCS website, and then just go to the page for the Board of Education, it will be there. I don't know what the inbox is, but I do know our website. So I'll put the website there.
Thank you so much. Thank you. And then we'll wrap up with this last question as we kind of bring this full circle, and also just really appreciating and valuing your advice. And so this is an advice question, but to other Latinx students and professionals considering the field of education as their career, what advice or encouragement would you offer them?
Again, I would say, don't get weary, don't get tired in doing good, because this is really a calling. It really is. Not everyone is meant to do this difficult work. There will be times where you're in there and you feel unappreciated by even the superintendent, the school board, the community, the state. I mean, there's so many pieces to the system. You're not being compensated in the way a teacher should be compensated for doing the most important work in the country. Or there are times your students don't seem to appreciate you and you feel like you're not being effective. I would say, don't get exhausted with that. Constantly find ways to not only protect your hope, but to think about how you are making a difference. The small things, one note from a student, a call from a parent, when a student makes progress on something that you've struggled with teaching them for months, when you get a policy passed, whatever field or branch of education you're going into, be in it for the long haul, knowing there will be times where it's overwhelming. There's so many pieces and it's so many broken pieces. You feel overwhelmed, like I can't fix this, but all of us together are making progress. It's just plain hard work. I don't know what else to say, except it's plain hard. And you have to say, I can do this. I will protect my hope. And I know that every day I'm making a difference on behalf of kids, and find new ways to inspire yourself, find new things to inspire you in education. Don't just get stuck with, I'm teaching 5th grade, I'm a principal at this school. Get involved in the different educational organizations throughout the state, throughout your communities. Get involved in the parent, in real deep parent engagement and community organizing. It will keep you inspired. But I have to be honest, there are going to be lows, but there are certainly going to be highs. And I always say, walk worthy of your calling. Do everything to walk worthy of your calling.
We're gonna need to make a shirt with that on top on it. Thank you so much for that. It reminds me of a quote that I heard when I was in grad school and I was trying to figure out my path and into education. And I met one of the oldest Latino alums from that school. And one of the first pieces of advice he gave me was that to accept that this is a challenge. And that's what I hear you saying, of embracing, walking into it with that mindset will shift a lot of perspective versus thinking it's going to be easy and walking in there and being like, wait a minute, I thought this was going to be, or this should be more smooth sailing, and just accepting the challenge at hand is also what I'm hearing, which is just, it's been very helpful for me to have that mindset. So thank you so much for all of this advice, and just that last piece that you're talking about as well, with encouraging people to get involved. This is the last cafecito of this season for the spring, but there are so many ways to get plugged in. If this conversation is sparking anything with you. And I just want to read you some of the comments in the chat, Dr. Contreras, because this conversation has, and so someone said, I'm so grateful to have ended up in this webinar today. I feel like you have blown wind back into my sails. Somebody else said, we got to build community and support and solidarity. And then somebody else said that your work is so inspiring, and just thinking about ways other school districts can follow your example and your team's leadership. And it's just been such a fruitful time to be here together. And so if this is the type of energy you're like, I want more of this, there's ways to get plugged in. We are part of building a network of folks across our state that are really dedicated to advancing our community, to thinking about issues of educational equity and opportunity. And if this is we're the type of people to get involved with. So come and join us. We'll drop some links in the chat for ways that you can get plugged in to, whether it's the newsletter. There's so many ways to get plugged in, but if you're curious, we want to, there's plenty of room for you in this movement. And so just want to wrap up with that, but also saying thank you again, Dr. Contreras. I can't wait for part 2, but I'm so grateful for part 1, and just thank you for your time and willingness to show up in such vulnerability and authenticity. It's been truly inspiring. So thank you so much.
Thank you all so much. I've dropped my email in the chat, and if you ever need anything, please call upon me.
Thank you so much. Thank you. And take care, everyone. Have a great rest of the week. Bye.